Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Nord Search podcast, where we speak to leaders in the power trading industry. So today, I'm delighted to be joined by Jayesh Gupta, who is the co-founder and CEO of Silurian AI, which are a really interesting startup in the world of building foundational models and looking very much at weather, amongst other things. But given our audience looking at weather, AI weather forecasting, I thought it'd be great to speak to Jayesh today. So, Jayesh, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me, Patrick. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, no, for sure. This is like such an exciting space. It's so fast moving. There's so much going on. And yeah, obviously, when we had a chat, I was really impressed with your background, what you're looking to do with Silurian. So, for those who do not know you, do not know your background, would we start there, please?
For sure. I mean, depends on like how far back do you want to go. My background is actually electrical engineering. Did my undergrad at IIT Kanpur in India, but it was kind of clear I kind of wanted to be in the AI space because it was very obvious even like beginning of the decade that this is the thing to do, and all the signal
Yeah.
processing and everything that happens is going to be done by automated systems properly at the full scale. And that's eventually what led me to Stanford. And at Stanford, I was again working in the computer science department now, but the same kind of problems, like how do we make decision making automated for a variety of applications. But my personal interest has always been how do we make these things work in the physical world. So I was starting from the robotics angle, but focused more on like multi-agent systems initially. So if you are in the AI world, you probably have heard of like deep reinforcement learning and a lot of these things coming up again. And those are the things that I was working on early on in my PhD. It was kind of clear in the academic context that to really do these things well, you have to scale up. And one of the biggest bottlenecks for a lot of the decision-making things were actually simulations of the physical world. And that's what like half of my grad school ended up being about. Like how do we leverage machine learning and data to build better models of the physical world? And that's where like initial focus for me was actually like more physics informed machine learning. How do we combine these things?
Yeah.
But once I joined Microsoft and I could actually have a scale of compute available, you could actually start running these bigger experiments to actually understand what matters and what doesn't matter. And that's where we kind of realized that like standard deep learning works very well in this space. It's just not being done properly. And at scale, just like standard machine learning methods, like the large scale deep learning methods do work in this domain. And that's where we kind of had, in some ways, like a fork in some ways of like what to focus on. You could focus on like more CFD kind of applications, computational fluid dynamics, and how materials get designed and everything. But all the data there is like behind firewalls of existing design and engineering companies. There's no public data to bootstrap a big machine learning solution from. And that's where the weather and climate space was super exciting because there is like, honestly, now that I'm running a company, there's honestly exabytes of data in this space. But even then, it was very obvious that there is like petabytes of data here. You could bootstrap a machine learning system from all the public data itself, which would ideally be, if everything is right, that our hypothesis is right, that it will be able to outperform operational systems quite easily, given what we are seeing in every other domain.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's
Interesting.
basically what led to like these research projects inside Microsoft. The first one was what was called ClimaX. It was published in the ICML, like one of the leading machine learning conferences. And there we showed like the first foundation model in this space, like how we could pre-train a relatively small model now with respect to what is happening in the LLM world and everything, but a fairly large model on honestly a lot more data than everybody else had been doing in this space. And then this model could be used to solve many problems in the weather and climate domain. And weather forecasting was just like one piece of it. And that's basically where we saw the scaling laws that if you are in the AI world, you might have heard of these terms like scaling laws, like where like performance predictably improves as you have more data and more compute and therefore bigger models to train. And that was still fairly obvious that this is going to happen in this space as well. This domain also, as we made the model larger, as we trained on more data, all metrics were continuing to improve. And that's when we decided that this needed a bigger scale up. And that's what led to the Aurora project at Microsoft, which maybe actually audience members might be even more familiar with because it came out as a Nature article like a few months ago in May. But there we demonstrated that you could train a billion parameter model on these kinds of different kind of data sources, and then not just outperform the European agencies forecast on the standard weather forecasting problems, but also do wave modeling, do pollution forecasting, do hurricane forecasting, all of it comparable or exceptionally better than the operational system and not just as a research artifact.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's how we kind of decided that this is not going to continue working on inside Microsoft, because Microsoft's focus had become more of the OpenAI, the standard LLM world. And this was not really the core focus. And we realized that this thing to actually really start impacting the real world, we will have what this model will allow you to do is to actually solve the downstream problem, which is often not just weather forecasting. It's often how things are coupled together and how weather impacts infrastructure. And I guess this is a good audience to kind of think about like a lot of the activity in the trading world is like how weather impacts the energy infrastructure. Yeah, I think those are the things that these models allow you to do significantly differently and better than what the previous generation of models could ever allow you to do.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating. We're obviously hearing what you worked on is the real bleeding edge of AI research. So you did your PhD at Stanford, and then you went to Microsoft and you worked on the research project. Maybe not everyone knows about, but I know has become a pretty big deal. Is it Aurora project you mentioned there? So just plainly, if someone's never heard of the Aurora research that you guys worked on at Microsoft and haven't looked at the paper that came out in May, what are the main findings in that research?
Yeah, I guess there are many things that were already happening in the space. People might also be familiar with the Graph Cache project from Google or the Pangu Weather project from Huawei. I think NVIDIA has a few forecast and related projects as well. And the underlying theme was basically for everybody until we kind of did some things differently. So ECMWF, the European Agency for Medium Range Forecasting, is the gold standard. And they are, which have enabled everything in this space as well, and also doing quite well on the AI side of things. But they had released over the last decade big data set called ERA5. So ERA5 is basically kind of coming up with the global weather state every hour over actually since 1940s, but at least in 1979, since the satellites have come, it's actually quite a good representation of how the global weather state has been historically. And they continue to update it every 5 days as well. So I think that was the fundamental piece of infrastructure that enabled a lot of research to happen in this space of okay, this is already petabytes of data. Can we use machine learning systems to learn from this data to start learning to do things in the weather space? So a lot of the approaches basically ended up being about, okay, ERA5 already gives you the weather state representation of what the previous state has been and what the next state is going to be. You can train, at the end of the day, a function which takes in the previous state and predicts the next state. And that's how you predict the future. That's how all AI systems are actually trained in this space. The underlying principle is the same. You take the previous weather states and train a model to learn to reduce the errors against predicting the future state. And almost all the papers that you see, they were mostly about scaling up the resolutions of the data. That is the hard problem. That's the hard engineering problem, because it's global state at even 0.25 degree resolution is a big problem. I have to think about videos, for example. Videos are RGB colors, 3 channels over time. While I'm thinking about the weather state, it's much, much bigger. There is temperature, precipitation, humidity, wind speeds. There's so many things happening just on the ground, and then all in the upper atmosphere. So you can think of like a full 3D volume of things that are happening. So leveraging all that data was actually a hard engineering problem before becoming a machine learning problem. And that is the thing that people started taking a crack at because the data was publicly available and there were like early signs that the machine learning systems could do quite well here. And that's what like all the papers were kind of competing against. Like how can we use this data set to build weather forecasting systems? And in the process, the models learn both the history and the physics because the data kind of already represents of like all the physics that we know with respect to how weather evolves over time. And the machine learning systems can learn to emulate that and in the process understand the physics behind these phenomena. So this is already happening, and I think we were all kind of ideas are always in the air and everybody is kind of taking a crack at it from their angles.
Yeah.
Our approach was kind of fundamentally different from a lot of these other approaches from the start was that like the problem of weather and is actually bigger than ERA5. ERA5 is like one representation of the weather phenomena. Actually, there are equivalent data sets from NASA called MERA2, from NOAA. There are many different versions of like what the global weather state was or has been because people understand the physics in different ways and like implement it in different ways as well. There's no full consensus about a lot of complex phenomena. So we basically were kind of like, if you really think about the problem space here, it's actually big. It's not just weather, it's climate and everything else. It's all different time scales, different spatial resolutions. People care about many different things as well. Like some people really care about some extreme event. Some people really care about like this particular variable. So there are many ways people like also care about many different things and with respect to like the general phenomena of weather. So from that perspective, like it was kind of clear that you have to build a more general purpose system, like which will be able to integrate a lot of these different data sources together. It can't be just one ERA5 data, which is the global world state and can only make global weather forecasts. What you needed was a more general purpose system, just like what kind of GPT showed as well. Like you can actually build, if you frame the problem correctly, you can actually build very general purpose systems. And that's the approach we ended up taking. So in the Climate paper, we trained not just on ERA5, but a variety of different climate model runs that have happened to kind of understand the long-term behavior of weather. So it's not even about the real Earth. It's sometimes about like what happens if I change the carbon dioxide levels from X to Y, or what happens if I put more like sulfate, or like do a lot of these different kinds of experimental runs of like
scenarios. Yeah,
all the scenarios of like what could the climate evolve over a long time if we changed a few things. And all that is actually a very useful information from a perspective of a model trying to learn everything about the domain. Because you're not just trying to understand what historically happened, but also things are always changing. Like human activity goes on. So you kind of want the models to also understand what happens if something's changed.
Yeah,
and how
cause
does
and
that
effect.
physics look like? So how would that physics have looked like? And you want the model to look at all these things to kind of try to compress it all and learn a much better representation of how the weather phenomena evolves.
Okay. And that was that. So historically, has it been just looking at previous data to predict what happens in the future? Whereas this is, like you said, foundational model able to look at a crazy amount of different scenarios, experiments to then make educated guesses, once they guesses, predictions on what can happen.
Yeah, so the goal is you have to design the model in a way to be able to keep taking in more data, which is not always even global. You should be able to take regional data. So if you only have US only data, the model should be able to take that. If you only have very hyper local data at a wind farm, you should eventually be able to take that. And that's kind of how we like thought about the problem and took steps to eventually get there. And that's what we have done at Silurian at GFT to be able to demonstrate how the same underlying foundation model allows us to obviously do global weather forecasting, but also do regional forecasting in the US at the moment, and hyperlocal client-driven forecasting and decision making, where we kind of can integrate data from their sensor network into these models to significantly improve hyperlocal forecasting for the standard weather variables, but also just solve some problems which were not forecasted, not really forecasted before.
Yeah, no, I can see why this is valuable for energy traders in particular. Before we go into that, like, so you did the research, it came out, then you made the decision. Was it you and a few other people that were involved in that research that you wanted to go and set your own startup up?
Yes.
Is that what happened?
Yes, me and Chris kind of decided that yeah, we have to kind of do this as a startup and try to solve real problems in the world.
Exciting. So when did you set the business up?
So we started in like officially in June 2024.
Right. Okay. So
Yeah,
are
it's not
we?
been that long.
Yeah. But today, do we have a product that's available?
Yeah. Yeah, so
Yeah.
we are
So we're live.
operational. You're live. You can create an account on our website, get weather
Yeah.
forecast, and you can. We're probably the only entity at the moment, other than the government agencies, who are like publicly providing last 2 years of our forecast, so you can evaluate on whatever metrics that you might care about.
Yeah. Awesome. So I want to delve into obviously the products and the solutions and the USPs of Silurian AI. So yeah, it'd be great to cover that now. Specifically talking about, for this audience, predominantly power traders, for somewhat people that are trading European power, US power, global power, basically, and that's on the very, very short term. So every 15 minutes, hourly, but going out also on the curve, trading week, months, years. So I guess it'd be good to focus on where this has the most value and what you actually offer. I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah. So I would say from the offering perspective, there are like I would say two ways of like thinking here. Like one is obviously how the markets currently operate, and obviously it's probably not everybody's going to change their workflows that quickly. And from their perspective, you can think of it as it's like we are providing an alternative weather forecast that is available hours earlier than the government runs. So you have a lot more time to do all the post-weather things that you do, and we can chat about those things as well. At least what my understanding is, and how AI could also play a role along those axes as well.
Yeah.
But it's the thing you get the standard weather variables that as you get from ECMWF, but you get it significantly earlier. They're a lot more accurate, especially if you care about like up to like 7 days kind of forecasts. You like many entities have evaluated like just the raw public forecast and how it's able to outperform the European ensemble, especially on temperatures globally, especially in many important regions like Texas and many parts of Europe. So from that perspective, like the API is already there. You just sign up for the API, there's a subscription fee. That's like the very standard thing that almost every entity works like that. And that's like we have customers along those axes as well. But we also have like some of these like more forward-looking customers who also see that the actual intelligence in the model is in what's called like the latent space. So there's like the whole process is like the model is kind of compressing all this information into like some representation internally that is then decoded back into like the weather variables that you care about. And that representation already couples all the complex weather phenomena, which is an interplay between many things. It's not like the temperature is disconnected from precipitation. And how the current systems kind of work is like they are kind of taking those variables, putting them into like their systems, and then translating that into, say, power or load, a lot of those other particular things. But like the intelligence is already in the latent space. the models also know that uncertainty there. Like the blurring behavior that is observed in some of the AI models is coming from because things are more uncertain as you go longer horizon. So everything kind of already the model kind of knows a lot more than is being decoded back. So with some of our customers, what we have been able to demonstrate is like if you already have data which kind of measures like how weather impacts something. For example, like icing on transmission lines. Eventually it can be outages and a lot of other things as well. We can actually train the model to directly predict that at a very high, in a very hyperlocal way. So like along the transmission lines, basically, it can actually predict like what the probability of icing is at a particular location. Same for like wind farms. Like there's a big power drop due to icing across wind farms north of certain latitude. And it's usually not really forecasted very well. Like people
Right.
respond after the fact, or like there are obviously things inside the wind turbine to kind of react to that. But there's no way to kind of think of it from a day ahead market perspective. Like, what is the probability of icing at all these wind farms? And therefore, also in principle, what is the drop that you expect in power production? So
Okay.
these models can directly predict, can be trained to directly predict those things. Because the information is in somewhere already there in the latent space of how a lot of these different variables are connected. They're just not being asked to directly tell you whether it's gonna be icing or not. So that's the part like where we are seeing a lot of interest from many different like larger energy customers who
Yeah.
also often
Asset
have a sensor.
managers. Asset.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they already have a lot of like sensors already deployed, kind of record, and in a lot of places they're kind of required by regulations that you have to put these weather sensing instruments along with the renewable farm that is being built. And this is like gives them an incentive to also keep and maintain them because this allows you to gain an advantage with respect to understanding the weather in a hyperlocal sense. But there's also the other interesting part about it is if you have a fairly large asset network, the weather phenomena is all connected. So if you
Yeah.
know weather, if you're observing weather from a lot of these things, both historically and continuously, that gives you an advantage if you can integrate that data with the global systems. You can actually predict weather significantly better than everybody else.
So for you, like what when you say significantly better, like what kind of data do you think you can have on the improved accuracy?
Yeah. So I would say like, I mean, somewhat depends on the locations as well. Obviously, it's not
Oh,
like I can give you like averaged out results. It ends up
average.
being for something like wind, like hub height wind speeds, it ends up being like 15% improvements. With respect to solar, it can actually be bigger. Or, again, depends on the locations. We have not really worked in the tropics yet.
Let's say I've
So
got a solar farm in ERCOT,
yeah,
for example.
yeah. So we are seeing at least like again 20% improvement with respect to like the global forecasts available there. This is all mostly focused on like day ahead and beyond, not like
Yeah.
the ultra short of like just the next 3 hours or next 6 hours, but like somewhat like day ahead and beyond kind of a problem. And so, yeah, this is like fairly consistent improvements in general. So if you care about longer horizons, you see improvements at longer horizons as well. You also start predict, especially if you're able to integrate these hyperlocal data, this really ends up mattering a lot for some of these things. For things like precipitation, which may or may not always be the most critical factor, but we see even bigger improvement, like easily like 30 to 40% improvements.
And what's currently available?
So everything is available.
Yeah, against what's currently available, you're seeing like a
Yes,
30 to
again,
40%
whatever
increase.
thing that was available. Yes.
Yeah, okay. This podcast is brought to you today by Nimble Alpha, who provide systematic market insights and are trusted daily by some of the highest performing power and gas traders at tier one energy trading houses. Nimble Alpha delivers clear, data driven signals across TTF, MBP, EUAs, German Power, Brent, and Henry Hub. They allow you to anticipate short-term trends, time executions, so you can stay ahead of volatility. So whether you trade spec, handle client flow, or manage risk, Nimble Alpha allows you to make sharper decisions with full transparency. In today's quant-driven markets, it's the perfect overlay of your fundamental research. So book your free trial today in the link below and get 10% off your first subscription. Stay nimble. Awesome. I know, for clients with wind farms and solar, like getting improvements of accuracy, that can literally be the difference in millions each day.
Yeah. Actually the more interesting part about these models are because they are like connecting the global with the hyperlocal. They actually are good at forecasting. If you think about like how the forecasting models are often built at like site level, usually they're taking some data generated by existing numerical models, maybe an ensemble of them, so many different physics models. But then they kind of stop at that site level and they're basically trying to take historical site data to kind of try to build a time series model or something to predict that. But if you think about the weather phenomena, it's all connected. If you want to predict what the wind is going to be in Texas tomorrow, you kind of have to know what's happening in the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
So you can't really get away from and trying to model the global phenomena really. But what these foundation models, a way of doing it actually allows you to do it in an integrated manner. So the same model kind of knows the global and the hyperlocal information and can therefore actually connect them much better.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, because obviously I'm no expert in weather forecasting, but speaking to people, in my network, clients. So what I've, correct me if I'm wrong, learned that in the ultra short-term intraday, it has been pretty good at forecasting in that space. But where like AI can have real advantages is going out, days, week. That's always been a very difficult place to get accuracy. Is that fair?
I would say it's not completely fair, but it depends on the phenomena and what kind of improvement that you are looking for. Yeah, in general, a particular problem is with evaluations. Yeah, in general, if you're really thinking about short term, what's called like persistence kind of modeling often works quite reasonably because things are most of the days are kind of simpler. But what is often ignored is like the extreme events because they get washed out in those evaluations of just averaging out everything. But what is important, but you kind of need to get those extreme events right as well. And for that, you really need to understand the phenomena. So just like GPT actually understands language. Hopefully now there is no doubt about that with most people's mind that they may or may not be intelligent in how we define or not define intelligence, but at least they do understand language in a way which you cannot really describe as equations or any other ways at all. It's the same thing with respect to like whatever the local physics and everything else is. Sometimes it is complicated and sometimes very simple approximations work out, but then they fail when things are different. But if your model really understands the physics and actually understands what is going on there, then it will not fail in an extreme scenario either, because you will already get that information in the past that things are changing and the model has to predict that. So from that perspective, I would say there's definitely improvements possible in this very short horizons as well. And that's kind of what we have shown with some of the regional models that we have in the US, where we refresh every hour and can also deliver fairly like high frequency information if required. And I do think like these models are capable of getting that well as well. So I think some of these things come up as like ramp events and other things. So I think the models are capable of predicting some of those things. It's just like the data behind this is mostly locked behind sensors which are not publicly available.
Yeah, no, really interesting. So you said obviously the extreme scenarios here. And I think obviously when you're an energy trader or power trader, extreme scenarios, extreme weather is where a lot of money is either made or a lot of money is lost. So are we saying here that you mentioned the accuracy is going to be improved by, 10, 20, 30%, which obviously sounds really valuable. But then looking at like at the time So the accuracy is important, but obviously speed is important too. So are we saying that we can increase the speed of understanding that there's an extreme weather event about to occur in, a few days or something like that?
Yeah, I think it depends on like some of the phenomena itself. Like some things are like just very easy to extract from the models. For example, hurricanes is something our models are extremely good at. They're already outperforming the official forecasts from the National Hurricane Center in the US. And
Okay.
just to give you some context for like how official forecasts are made, they're made by human forecasters, kind of ensembling many different models and hand tweaking some of those things sometimes to get the paths of the hurricanes right, while just the automated paths extract the models already outperform them with respect to errors against the actual path taken by these hurricanes. And we have evaluated in Aurora for 2023 and 2022. With GFD, we also evaluated for 2024 season, and is being used by some disaster management companies this year. And we also have live evaluations happening. It's been somewhat of a quiet Atlantic hurricane season, but we have predicted how some things are going to die out fairly early on as well. So from both those perspectives, like false positive, false negatives, all these things matter with respect to extreme events. And the models actually are fairly calibrated.
Well,
So I think so. It's mostly partly about like what do we are able to extract out from these models sometimes, which does not always show up in like the temperature values necessarily. Like that's partly about the objectives used for training. You can use a different objective to fine tune these, and so that's what, for example, we're able to deliver not just like the forecast, but also like the uncertainty bands around the forecast. And that's what we especially do in US, where especially for things like wind and solar, people often don't just want like what's the likely prediction, but also what are your uncertainty bands around it. And we're able to provide that at like the weather level. So those and at a full spatial level as well. So it's not like a point estimate. So you can kind of see the entire grid and like how your uncertainties are across the grid as well. So those are the things that like these models are actually, especially the foundation model way of approaching the problem allows you to do things a lot more flexibly. And some of it is like we actually want to have conversations with like people in your audience to like actually understand like what information would change workflows and like how can actually we enable the models to deliver you that directly.
Yeah. So with this being like a foundational model, like can it be customized to suit a specific client's requirement?
Yes, that's kind of what the main thing that we're seeing, like the biggest USPs of these models have been like this is like public information that we are working with like Hydro-Quebec and Total Energies. We should have the paper come out with Hydro-Quebec as well that we demonstrated across the power grid how integrating some of their sensor observations they could improve forecasting performance across the grid, but also make some extreme events which are like very low probability, like the base rate is about like 3% or some things like 13%, all those things like actually forecastable more than a day ahead, and with very good false positive, false negatives, which can be tuned because it's a probabilistic forecast. So depending on your like risk management strategies, you can also attune with respect to what's the false positives and false negatives you are okay living with.
Yeah, I can imagine that's where the real value is. Like I say, if you're someone with a large asset pool, having a portfolio to look at specific cases for that's going to be a huge difference for that business in terms of performance and hedging, and that can make or break certain periods of the winter or
Yes.
like seasonal events. So yeah, I think that I can understand why that's hugely valuable to this particular audience.
Yeah, and I think that's where some of the extreme events become easier to do as well. Like, for example, during icing events, there are often snowstorms, and you have like very high wind velocities, which are mostly never predicted by like global weather models. But our models are actually able to pick up on that and not just be improved on icing forecasts, but also get improved on like wind speed forecasts.
Yeah. Amazing. And I can say, so you're not just focused on trading companies, you're also working with, I imagine governments will find this very valuable, local authorities. This could literally save lives, like knowing that there's a hurricane coming, and a bit as earlier the better, you need to know about that.
Yes. So you're working with like utilities as well as disaster management companies as well as the governments to basically we do believe like from like a certain perspective the infrastructure for how weather forecasting works is going to be rewritten this decade. These systems are basically ready to be like operational, and we are trying to accelerate their operational.
Yeah, and how fast are the advancements going? Because I can't keep up with the advancements in AI. Every week there's new advancements. There's a new model. So I guess like it'd be interesting to get your view on like where we are today, what can be done today, and what do you feel can be done in 12 months' time, in 2 years' time. I mean, that would be really, really interesting.
I mean, there's the different perspectives of like how you look at things and how also you approach the problem. I think it's the meteorologists in some ways who care about weather in itself, but almost everybody eventually cares about how weather impacts them. And that's the part that is the actual important piece in the real world.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, we see, I mean, even in the weather side, already big improvements have happened. I think AIFS is already operational inside ECMWF. And they also have an ensemble version of it also operational already. So they are actually doing quite well, like respect to how the AI models are getting deployed. The next step is obviously integrating a lot more of the observations that is right now being done by physics-based systems. How that data assimilation process works will be like increasingly done by AI solutions as well. But I don't think that problem has been properly cracked yet in the same sense. Like I would say like weather forecast, especially the global weather forecasting piece has been cracked. So there's still some research there are some breakthroughs to happen there as well with respect to like truly cracking it. We have a particular approach with our foundation models, but I'm sure like there are researchers also looking at it from a different perspective of like how traditionally data assimilation has been done and how machine learning can help there directly as well. So that's, I think, from weatherbeat's perspective, a lot of it is about how do we extract more information from these observations. And if you talk to like many meteorologists, especially who work on the numerical model side or the data assimilation side, and also all the companies collecting data and selling to the government, for example, they will tell you that like not even probably like 10% of the data ends up getting used. Some of it is obviously the data is noisy, but some of it is also that the physical models require certain things to be quite smooth. And it's not really smooth in reality and not really smooth in observations. But they kind of throw away that data so that the physics part can work out. But they're not like the machine learning models don't have similar problems, and they can integrate a lot of these observations significantly better. And at least as a company, we're trying to demonstrate that over the next year as well with like different customers of like how the foundation models allow you to integrate many different observation sources and significantly improve forecasting performances globally. Not necessarily even globally, but in a hyperlocal sense of like where it matters, but also how do we basically combine a lot of these different observation sources together so we're no longer dependent on the government cycle of providing forecasts like every 6 hours globally, but you can provide forecasts on demand basically.
Right, okay. How far away are we to that?
I think that depends on like the kind of networks. I think we're probably, at least some of it depends on like what metrics you care about. I think there are people who are technically already doing that, but they never really show you the numbers. I think that the key part is like these things have to be good enough that you would want to show the numbers. And I think that is likely going to take maybe a year to be good on like some things, not on everything, but to improve things on key things that matter on the surface. Like you can think about like many different things that have to be done, and that will happen over time, but especially on the surface where we all live and which matters the most, I think there are
Yeah.
very big gains that will happen over the next year.
Yeah, amazing. So you talked about like that 20 and 30% increase in accuracy. What do you think that accuracy increase will be in like 2 years' time?
I think then it kind of becomes somewhat hard to think in terms of percentages. You should think in terms of like what the errors are, for example, for like 3 day ahead forecast versus 5 day ahead forecast.
Yeah,
And you kind of specifically kind of saying that like your 5 day forecast errors next year would be equivalent to 3 day forecast errors right now.
right.
So you kind of are getting like two extra days of
Yeah,
forecasting performance. So I think we kind of are, at least we should see like over the next couple of years, we should be able to push the accuracies to like 3 days basically. So like a day ahead forecast. I mean that's hard. Like a 3 day ahead forecast in the near future will have similar errors as a day ahead forecast does right now.
wow. Yeah, wow. I think, 5 years ago, that probably felt impossible
Yeah,
to be at that point.
yeah, I think that's the part where like there's a big democratization that AI enabled in this space, which is kind of unlike some of the other LLM domains in some ways. Like, the models are honestly still not very big. There is a lot of scaling to do on the modeling side as well here, but the existing supercomputing infrastructure required, which could only be built by the government, in some ways slowed down progress because only the government could do it. But that has changed now. And now like small players like us can actually like innovate a lot more quickly and actually deliver these things a lot more quickly as well. And that
Yeah,
basically accelerates progress and like how quickly some things can be done.
yeah. No, it's like we're seeing this in obviously all of the big tech companies, how they want really smart, small teams working on these research problems. And it'd be interesting to get your view on that. Like, a lot of my clients have like quantitative research teams. Like for you, what do you think are like the key ingredients of like world-class research?
I mean, the key aspect, I mean, especially, there are many ways to again think about it. There's obviously the standard answers of like curiosity and I would say conviction. But I think big part of the modern deep learning research in general is that you have to care about engineering. The solutions are like both software plus hardware optimized. You have to understand how the GPUs work, how the whole distributed system is going to work, how the data is going to come from location here to where, what is the frequency the data is going to be, what's the delay that's going to be. Kind of have to think of those things and account for that in how you design the models themselves and how you train those models as well. And then kind of have a fairly methodological approach of like tracking how you improve things, like what works, what doesn't work. So some of those things are, I would say, you kind of have to come up with ideas, but also have to be willing to execute on it. So you kind of need a team that can deliver on that. That has not always been true. People often sometimes have like a very theory bias or a very execution bias, but you kind of, in the deep learning world, you really have to combine them together and be willing to be more empirical and data driven. Like look at the data. Like that's the other part. Like people haven't often even looked at the data itself. That's where honestly some of the differentiating things also come from. The major thing that Aurora did differently was also like data, and with GFT as well. If you're learning from the real world, you also understand what data matters more than others. So I think those are the parts that, like, yeah, you really have to look at the data and you really have to be
Yeah,
willing to look into the details of engineering to design good
yeah,
solutions in this space.
yeah,
And that's what I see overall as well is like from a company perspective and everything else, like everybody from a trading angle perspective, everybody has their own strategies and everybody has their own way of like what risk they can take and all those things as well. I'm not 100% sure why everybody would want to rebuild the entire weather stack themselves. The key part is like the weather stack has to be flexible enough to allow them to integrate their things and their strategies to get the intelligent decisions that they are after.
yeah. Something that I'm interested in as well, like obviously to be an AI researcher, you have to obviously be, genius level machine learning and as an engineer. But is there any like softer skills that you feel like if you're going to work in a really small, really heavy research project where you're doing cutting edge research, like is there any softer skills that are really important too, other than being super smart?
Yeah. No, I mean, the softer skills are, in some ways, you have to be, like, it's kind of hard to say, but like, there's a certain kind of humility that often happens so that you don't see like some things beneath you.
Mm.
Like you are like such a senior researcher and therefore you don't need to do this.
Yeah.
So those are the parts like you do kind of have to stop thinking in those terms. Like a lot of small details have to come together for these things to like really be good. There are many ways these things end up being okay. Like the thing is the models kind of want to learn. So even if everything is not like great, things might still be okay, but they won't be great. And for things to like really work, you kind of have to look at a lot of these details. And you have to be in some ways humble enough to be willing to look into those things.
Yeah.
I think that's the major piece. So that basically solves a lot of the collaboration things and being able to communicate with each other as well.
Yeah. So that collaboration is still key, is it?
Yeah, of course. Like I think humans are eventually humans.
Yeah, for sure. So interested just on like you went from research, Aurora, you now got your startup. What are the biggest differences from going research to actually running a business in this space, having a product? Like, is it drastically different to what you thought it would be?
I mean, there are elements of it which obviously like you would never really learn about the real world when you are just doing research. Like what acts, how does decision making happen, and what the state of the things really are. And in some ways it's been interesting. Like people often claim about desiring probabilistic forecasts and other things. But when you talk to them and if they tell you that the existing vendor provides them with what they call like P95, P90s and everything, and they have been providing that for almost a decade, and they have never ever checked whether their forecasts are within those bands or not, or like are those values calibrated or not. So people often sometimes claim to want things, but never really know what to do with it. The other part, what I have, been honestly surprised by is in some ways the financial engineering that has to happen for a lot of these infrastructure projects to work.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to explain, but that is the kind of stuff that you would not really learn as a researcher. But that kind of helps you understand, okay, why some of these things matter and like how can you improve some of the operations and enable like some of these things to be a lot more profitable and therefore a lot more easier to build.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. But something that I'm interested in as well, and I think quite a lot of my clients are, to get your perspective on this as an AI researcher, someone who's worked on the kind of projects you've worked on before, like how big a role do you think AI is going to play in trading? So like within energy trading, I think it's quite known that they're probably not as sophisticated in the main as in equities, in FX trading, crypto maybe. It's getting better. There's a lot more sophistication, especially in the short term. We're seeing some really big quant firms getting involved in those markets in the last 12, 18 months. But like for you, yeah, how big a role do you think it's going to play?
I think, especially if you think about the power markets compared to equity and other things, it's still all a physical system.
Yeah.
Like the power grid and everything else. I mean, there are obviously humans in the loop and humans involved. I'm not really saying that there is like no human element, but compared to equities, where there's a lot of like just crowd psychology, like everybody loves the leader of this company, and therefore, no matter what happens, the stocks is not going to go down. But that is not exactly the case with like, especially the power market in some ways. It is like a lot more like fundamental, like driven by physics and other things.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, like there's a much bigger capacity for a lot of the stack to be automated. And especially with AI, a lot of the things that when you start integrating things in the latent space, the models really learn things that it's very hard. In some ways, like that's what probably the best traders are doing. The patterns that they are recognizing from looking at a lot of these things together. In some ways, the machine learning systems can learn that and extract those patterns out. I think a lot of that aspect is definitely gonna get automated of like how do you derive signals from all the information. Yeah, the key part is like obviously what signal is important also depends on your strategy.
Yeah.
So in some ways it requires working closer together with respect to how you frame the problem and like how you actually deliver the answers that you are looking for. A lot of those aspects will definitely are like in some ways a lot more easier to automate than in the equity market or any other things because it's at the end of the day still physical systems. I think that's the kind of discussion that has come across talking to people as well. A lot of the way like some of the trading aspects work is like there's a weather part of it, but there's also like how the power flows across the grid as well.
Yeah.
And obviously US and Europe have like slightly different market structure and therefore different kinds of flow models make more sense or the other. But what I've heard constantly from a lot of the places is like those models are also extremely slow. So they can't always easily take big ensembles to really figure out their tail risk and everything else. I would say there is a foundation model there as well. Like how does something integrate the whole power flow modeling and the weather phenomena all coupled together and actually delivers the information you need on the grid to enable decision making, to enable trading. It's kind of obviously dual in that respect. So those things are definitely on our mind.
Yeah. So it's really interesting to get that perspective that you think it's probably due to the physical and fundamental nature of the power markets. You said it can be more automated, it can be more predicted or predictable than equities because you're dealing with human psychology. You're dealing with, Elon fanboys that will pump Tesla every opportunity they get. So there's different dynamics in those markets. But with sophisticated AI modeling, you think there's a huge opportunity then within power. Is that what you would say?
Yes.
Okay.
I think
that's really interesting.
I would say that's, I think, the biggest difference overall. And you can keep acquiring better observations, better data, and a lot of these things to improve these things. And it's in some ways a lot easier to do than like humans in some ways. But maybe I'm wrong. I'm not necessarily an expert. Maybe in aggregate, humans are more predictable than power systems. But it will probably still be surprising.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to get people's views on that topic for sure. Because what we're seeing, especially in intraday markets, like which was historically 24/7 manual trading. We're now seeing each year and more trades that are done algorithmically. It's now predominantly algorithmically, but 3 years ago, 5 years ago, it wasn't that. And I think as each year goes by, we're seeing new sophistication, new players enter the markets that aren't manual traders that are running businesses. This is machine learning experts that are coming in with similar backgrounds to yourself who can bring a new edge to the market and have small, very talented teams and have a very big impact. I think that's the interesting thing and exciting thing for me, who's very focused on the algorithmic trading side. I see the massive opportunity here.
Yeah, no, I agree there for sure. Especially, I mean, in some ways, that's the part where we'll see how market structures also evolve. Yeah. So some of it is regulation dependent and also like how batteries get deployed as well.
Yeah, it's very hard to manually trade a battery. You need it to be automated. I think we're already at that point. Absolutely. Amazing. No, look, I think just circling back to, obviously, if we've got listeners that are really interested in what you guys have got to offer, how does that process work? If they're interested, who should they reach out to? Where should they go? And what is their opportunity for a demo? Like, could you tell us a little bit about that?
For sure. I mean, we are all public. Silurian.ai is the website. Our public models are available for you to evaluate. Already, you should be able to check the weather anywhere in the world. And these things are operational, and you can check that these things get updated earlier than any of the weather forecasts from the government agencies. But the process in general is like you should contact me or my business officer, Alex at Silurian.ai. And the process is usually us talking to you, try to understand what data that you have, what problems that you are interested in, and
Yeah.
how that can be integrated together to actually solve the problems that you care about. I think that's the integrated approach that foundation models allow you to do, where
Yeah.
like the biggest advantage is. But obviously,
Yeah.
like not everybody is ready for that, and just better weather information is also fairly easy to
Yeah.
subscribe to.
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating. So you guys are based in the US. You've already got like customers in the US. Do you already have energy trading customers in Europe as well at this moment? You've already got customers?
We have a few. We have a few in where you would expect in Denmark.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, Denmark is actually the most popular country that listen to the podcast. So I'm sure there's people who are interested in talking to you guys as well. So yeah, obviously feel free to reach out to you or your colleagues if they're interested for sure. Okay. Amazing. Well, look, thanks for your time. It's fascinating. It's such a fast moving environment, weather forecasting. It's great to hear what you guys at Silurian are able to do. I think it's game changing. I think there's a lot of people been waiting for this kind of innovation, and I've no doubt that people will be interested in talking to you guys after listening to this. So I really appreciate your time, Jayesh.
Thank you so much, Patrick. It was a pleasure talking to you as well.